You sat in classrooms for 12, 16, sometimes 20 years. You learned trigonometry, the Pythagorean theorem, the date that Magna Carta was signed. You dissected sentences and frogs. You memorized the periodic table. You did not learn how money actually works. That was not an oversight. It was the design. The modern school system was built by industrialists like Rockefeller and Carnegie in the early 20th century, explicitly to produce reliable workers for a factory economy, people who showed up on time, followed instructions, traded their hours for a paycheck, and spent that paycheck on whatever the other workers were making. Every lesson that could let you escape that loop was kept out of the curriculum. There are 7 of them. By the time we reach the 7th, you'll understand why one of the richest men in 20th century America died in a flannel jacket he'd worn for 30 years. Lesson 1, the salary was designed to disappear. Here's the first thing nobody told you. Your salary is not a path to wealth. It is a maintenance device. It is calibrated by your employer to keep you alive enough to keep working, and dependent enough to keep needing the work. Read that twice. In 1955, a British naval historian named C. Northcote Parkinson published a small essay in The Economist that became known as Parkinson's Law. He observed that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. Years later, his observation was extended into the financial domain. The principle, restated, becomes brutal. Expenses rise to meet income. You got the job, you got the raise, you got the second raise, and somehow the bank account looks the same. The car got bigger. The apartment moved closer to downtown. The dinners got nicer. The subscriptions multiplied. You started ordering the medium wine instead of the house red. You did not feel any of it happen. That's the point. Lifestyle inflation is the most successful psychological operation ever to run on the working population. It is invisible because it doesn't feel like spending. It feels like progress. This is what your school skipped. Schools taught you the multiplication table, but not the table that actually decides your life. The gap between what you learn and what you keep. Because the gap is the only number that matters. A surgeon making $400,000 a year who saves nothing is poorer, in the only meaningful sense, than a janitor who saves $4,000 a year for 40 years. The surgeon owns nothing. He rents his existence at a high price. The janitor owns time. Morgan Housel, in The Psychology of Money, made this point with surgical clarity. Wealth is not what you see. Wealth is what's hidden. The Lamborghini in the driveway is, by definition, money no longer compounding. It is a tombstone for the future you traded to be admired in the present. George Clason, writing in 1926 in The Richest Man in Babylon, gave the rule its oldest form. Pay yourself first, before the landlord, before the grocer, before the tailor, before the tax collector. A tenth of every coin that enters your hand belongs to you, not as spending money, but as the seed of the next life. The school system never taught this for one specific reason. A worker who pays himself first eventually stops needing the worker's wage. Lesson 2. The specific knowledge heresy. There's a phrase Naval Ravikant uses that contains more financial truth than 4 years of business school. Specific knowledge. It means knowledge that cannot be trained for, knowledge that cannot be replicated by reading the syllabus, knowledge that lives at the intersection of your obsessions, your strange interests, your peculiar talents, the things that look like play to you but feel like work to everyone else. Schools cannot teach specific knowledge. The system is industrial. It is built for replication, for grading, for standardization. The specific knowledge is the opposite of all three. It is, by its nature, ungradable, which is why the most lucrative knowledge is the kind you teach yourself. In 1968, a Stanford psychologist named Walter Mischel ran what became known as the marshmallow experiment. Children were placed in a room with a marshmallow and told that if they could resist eating it for 15 minutes, they would receive 2. The standard reading of the study, discipline equals success, is what textbooks repeated for decades. The deeper finding was different. The children who succeeded were not more disciplined. They had developed strategies the others hadn't. They covered their eyes. They sang to themselves. They invented small games to make the time pass. They were not resisting temptation. They were redirecting attention. That is specific knowledge in miniature. It is not the willpower. It is the technique no one taught them, that they figured it out alone. The economy now rewards this disproportionately. A man who learns to write code in a niche programming language by tinkering at night earns multiples of a man who graduated top of his class in something the system trained 10,000 others to do simultaneously. A woman who develops a strange feel for typography because she spent her adolescence building zines is, in 2026, employable in ways the corporate marketing major is not. If your skills can be standardized, they can be replaced by another worker, by a cheaper worker, by a machine. If your skills are specific to you, accumulated through obsession rather than instruction, you become the only person who can do what you do, and the price you can charge becomes a function of how badly someone needs it done. The school system trained you to be replaceable on purpose. It's easier to manage replaceable workers. It's easier to evaluate replaceable workers. It is easier to convince replaceable workers that their salary is generous. Naval calls the escape scalable expertise. The path is simple to describe and almost impossibly hard to walk. Follow what feels like genuine curiosity. Develop it past the point of social embarrassment and refuse to flatten yourself in a category the labor market already has a price for. The man who can be priced will be priced. The man who cannot will name the price. Lesson 3, the 1% principle. The third lesson is buried in a piece of data almost nobody mentions. Warren Buffett is worth, at last count, somewhere over $100 billion. He is, almost universally, considered the greatest investor of the 20th and 21st centuries. There are entire universities of analysis dedicated to decoding his methods. Here is what almost nobody points out. Approximately 99% of Buffett's net worth was accumulated after his 50th birthday, roughly 97% after 60. He has been investing since he was 10. His first 40 years built the runway. The last 40 did everything else. This is not a story about patience. It is a story about something darker and far more applicable to your life. The technical term is the tail event. In statistics, the tail of a distribution is the rare extreme outcome, the thing that almost never happens, but when it does, dwarfs everything else combined. Nassim Taleb has written volumes on it. Most of finance, when stripped of its mathematics, is the study of tails. What Morgan Housel observed in The Psychology of Money is that tail events do not just dominate financial markets. They dominate every domain of life that compounds. A small number of decisions you make will determine almost everything about your financial life. The other 95% of choices are noise. Most people get this exactly backwards. They obsess over the noise, the daily coffee, the weekly takeout, the $11 streaming service, and remain catastrophically casual about the few decisions that genuinely matter. Where you live for 10 years, who you marry, whether you negotiate the salary, which industry you spend your 20s inside, whether you start the thing or remain an employee of the thing. The school system has no language for tail events. School trains you to optimize the daily score, the homework, the test, the participation grade. It is a system of small, consistent inputs producing predictable outputs. Real wealth does not work that way. Real wealth is shaped by a handful of asymmetric bets that, when they hit, change the slope of an entire life. Cornelius Vanderbilt, illiterate his entire life, made his first asymmetric bet at 16, borrowing $100 from his mother to buy a small boat that would ferry passengers around New York Harbor. He did not become the richest man in America by working harder than the dock workers. He became it by owning the boat while others rowed. The lesson school refused to teach is this: the size of your life is determined by a small number of decisions made under conditions of uncertainty that look stupid until they don't. You cannot grade your way into the tail. You can only place yourself near it, repeatedly, until one of them lands. Stop for a moment. If everything said so far were widely understood, the global economy would buckle within a year. There is a reason these ideas are not in textbooks, and it is not benign neglect. It is structural. An entire architecture of consumption depends on you not knowing what comes next. In 1899, a strange American economist named Thorstein Veblen published a book that nobody assigns in high school. It was called The Theory of the Leisure Class. It introduced a phrase that has quietly governed human behavior ever since: conspicuous consumption. Veblen's claim was simple and devastating. A significant percentage of what people buy has nothing to do with utility. It has to do with signaling. The watch is not for telling time. The car is not for getting to work. The handbag is not for carrying things. They are visible declarations to neighbors, to coworkers, to strangers, to ourselves. that we are not the kind of person who has to worry about money. Most modern spending is not consumption, it is performance. Hounsel calls this the man in the car paradox. When you see someone in a beautiful car, you almost never think, that man is impressive. You think, imagine how impressive I would look in that car. The driver is invisible. The car is doing its job, but the job has nothing to do with the driver. It is being projected onto every passing observer who is, at that moment, calculating their own social position. The cruelty of this is geometric. You spend money you do not have, to impress people who do not notice, to communicate a status you do not actually possess. And then, having spent the money, you have less of it, which means the next round of impression must be financed with something else. A longer loan, a deeper credit line, a future paycheck mortgaged in advance. Veblen called it conspicuous consumption. A more honest name would be the dignity tax. It is the price of admission to a stage where the audience isn't watching. Thomas Stanley, a marketing professor at Georgia State University, spent decades surveying American millionaires for what became the millionaire next door. His findings violated every cultural intuition. The actual millionaires drove used cars, Toyotas, Buicks, 10-year-old sedans. They lived in middle-class neighborhoods. They wore inexpensive watches. They bought their suits on sale. They mowed their own lawns. The flashy spenders Stanley interviewed, the ones who looked rich, were almost universally not. They were what Stanley called UAWs, underaccumulators of wealth, high income, negligible net worth, a rented life with the props turned up. Schools never taught the difference because the difference is not visible. Real money is the absence of the spectacle. Lesson 5, 2 skills, 1 word. There is a sentence in Housel's work that, once read, you cannot stop seeing operate around you. Getting wealthy and staying wealthy require completely opposite skills. Getting wealthy demands optimism, risk, swing, conviction, the willingness to bet on something that does not yet exist. It is offensive in nature. You attack opportunities. You take swings. You concentrate. Staying wealthy demands the opposite: pessimism, caution, survival, frugality at the level of paranoia. You diversify. You plan for catastrophes that statistically may not happen, but financially will end if they do. You assume the future will be worse than the present, and you build your life so that even if it is, you survive. This is why so many fortunes evaporate within a single generation. A long-running study by the Williams Group analyzed 3,200 wealthy families across 2 decades. 70% lost their wealth by the second generation, 90% by the third. The pattern was so consistent, it had a name: shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The first generation built it through risk. The third generation lost it through inheritance. Children raised inside the wealth who never learned the second skill, who applied an offensive mindset to a defensive situation. Most people are taught one skill or the other. Schools teach defense. Be cautious. Follow the rules. Do not stand out. The streets teach offense. Take risks. Fight for it. Swing hard. Almost nobody is taught when to use each. The financial life of an ordinary person, plotted across decades, is a sequence of switches between these 2 modes. There are seasons when the only correct move is offensive. The 20s, the early years of a business, the decade after a windfall. There are seasons when the only correct move is defensive, after a major life event, in a downturn, at any age past 50, when the runaway is shorter than the resume. Confuse the 2 and you collapse. A young man playing it safe at 25 is bleeding out years he will never get back. A man at 60 taking the swings of a 25-year-old is one decision from losing everything he spent 4 decades building. This is the lesson school could not teach because it requires judgment, and judgment cannot be standardized. There is no homework that produces it. There is no test that proves you have it. You acquire it the way Hetty Green acquired hers, alone, by watching cycles unfold and remembering, in your bones, what worked and what did not. Lesson 6, The Witch of Wall Street. Hetty Green is a name almost nobody knows. She died in 1916 in New York with an estate valued somewhere between $100 million and $200 million, equivalent today to roughly $2 to $4 billion. She was, at the time of her death, possibly the wealthiest woman in America. She lived in cheap boarding houses. She wore the same black dress until it disintegrated. She refused to turn on the heat in her apartment in winter. She washed only the hems of her skirts to have soap. When her son broke his leg as a child, she allegedly tried to admit him to a charity hospital under a false name to avoid medical bills. The injury worsened, and his leg was eventually amputated. She was, by every account, a brutal and perhaps deformed human being. She was also operating on a financial principle that 99% of high earners never grasp. She bought when others panicked. She sold when others celebrated. She lived on a fraction of her income because she had decided very early that the spectacle of wealth was for fools. The substance of wealth was those for willing to be misunderstood. The press called her the Witch of Wall Street. They mocked her clothing. They mocked her habits. They wrote stories about her stinginess that became the entire framing of her legacy. She did not care. The mockery was the price. 8 decades later, in March 2014, a janitor and gas station attendant named Ronald Reed died in Brattleboro, Vermont. He was 92. Most of the town had known him for a half a century. He cut his own firewood. He drove a 2007 Toyota Yaris. He used a safety pin to hold his coat together when the button fell off. When his will was read, the town discovered that Ronald Reed had left an estate of approximately $8 million. He had quietly purchased dividend-paying stocks for 65 years, Procter & Gamble, JP Morgan, General Electric, and held them. Nobody knew, not even the woman who served him coffee, not his neighbors, not in any complete way his family. This is what Stanley meant by the millionaire next door. Real money does not look the way the movies have taught you to look for it. It looks like nothing at all. It looks like a man at a gas station holding his coat together with a pin. What Hetty and Ronald shared was not skill. It was immunity to social pressure. They had each, in their own strange way, opted out of the performance economy. They had decided that what other people thought of them was not worth the rate of return required to manage that opinion. The school system cannot teach this lesson because the school system is, in itself, the first audience whose approval you must learn to disregard. Lesson 7, Time Equity. The 7th lesson is one that recontextualizes the previous 6. It comes from Naval Ravikant, and it can be stated in 11 words. You will spend your life either owning equity or renting it. The man who works for a wage is renting his time. He does not own the upside of what his labor produces. He receives a fixed amount per hour or per year, and the difference between that amount and what his labor actually generates becomes someone else's profit. This is not a moral statement. It is a structural one. The man who owns equity, whether in a business he founded, a stake in a company he joined early, real estate, intellectual property, code that runs while he sleeps, content that compounds in distribution, is collecting on the gap between input and output. While he sleeps, the asset works. While he is on vacation, the asset works. While he is grieving, recovering, distracted, gone, the asset continues to produce. Naval distinguishes 3 forms of leverage: labor leverage, other people working for you; the oldest form, the one that built civilization; capital leverage, money working for you, the one banking taught the rich first; and the new leverage, born in the last 40 years and still spreading: code and media, software that scales infinitely at zero marginal cost, content that, once made, can be consumed by 10 or 10 million with the same production effort. Permissionless leverage. You do not need anyone's approval to write code. You do not need anyone's approval to write words and post them. The barrier is not access. It is patience and the willingness to be ignored for the years it takes for one of your bets to land. This is the 7th lesson, and it is the one schools could not teach because it nullifies the entire purpose of schooling. A school's job is to produce labor. A self-sovereign asset builder is the labor system's negation. M.J. DeMarco, in The Millionaire Fastlane, draws the same distinction with different language. The slow lane, he calls it, work, save, retire at 65, is mathematically rigged against you. By the time compound interest matures, the years that were worth living are spent. The fast lane is built around control and scale. You build a system. The system serves people. You own the system. The number of hours in your life is fixed. The only question is whether those hours are exchanged for a wage in real time, or whether you build assets that detach your income from minutes. The first life ends when your body gives out. The second life ends when you decide it does. 7 lessons. Stitched together, they form a single uncomfortable picture. The school system was not designed to make you wealthy. It was designed to make you legible, to produce a kind of person whose value can be measured, priced, and integrated into a larger economic machine. It succeeded, astonishingly so, for over a century. The wealthy are not, for the most part, smarter than you. They are not better. They are not more deserving in any moral sense. They have simply been operating on a different rulebook. Their salary, if they have one, is irrelevant. What matters is the gap they preserve. Their leverage comes from skills no school could grade. Their fortunes were built by a few asymmetric decisions, not the daily grind. They refuse to pay the dignity tax because the audience is hallucinating. They know when to be aggressive and when to be paranoid, and the switch between them is the entire game. They tolerate being misunderstood by people who are louder than them and poorer than them, and somewhere along the way, they decouple their income from their hours. None of it is hidden. All of it is forbidden. Forbidden in the older sense of the word. Not banned, but kept slightly out of reach. Discussed in books that aren't assigned. Practiced by people who don't advertise it. Modeled by figures like Hetty and Ronald, whose names you weren't taught, because their lies implied an indictment of the lives that most of us lead. The man in the flannel jacket from the opening, the one who died with $8 million in unassuming Vermont, did not have access to information you do not have. He read the same financial pages anyone could read. He bought stocks anyone could buy. He held them when nearly everyone else didn't. The difference was not the data. The difference was the audience he had stopped performing for. Most people walking around at this very moment are running an elaborate, expensive, decades-long advertisement for a version of themselves that does not financially exist. The cost of that advertisement is the wealth they could otherwise have had. The 7 lessons are the cost of not knowing. You know now. If anything in this video opened a door you don't intend to close, subscribe to the channel. We go further into the rooms most people pretend don't exist.